Shalom and welcome to another edition of They Called Him Yeshua, and this is one that I have been greatly looking forward to. These are friends of mine. This was my first rabbi, Rabbi Michael Wolf from Cincinnati, and this is a dear friend, Rick Fisher, who is a Facebook legend. And this person gave me a home, a roof over my head when I was a struggling young adult. This is Dinky Lowenthal, and today we're just going to talk about the backdrop of all of these stories that make up They Called Him Yeshua. They Called Him Yeshua is telling the story of the spiritual and cultural revival of the 60s and 70s that gave us what Messianic Judaism today. It was a line of demarcation between Hebrew Christianity and what is now known as Messianic Judaism. But what was the world like in that time? We're going to talk about a lot of things today. The British invasion. We're going to talk about Woodstock. We're going to talk about the first foot on the moon. We're going to talk about the assassinations. We're going to talk about the civil rights movement and what Judaism was in America at that time. So we've got a lot of things to cover and not nearly enough time to cover it. So I'm going to get started. Let's take a trip in the Wayback Machine. What was life for you? And we'll start with Michael, 1965 to 1970. What was life for you back then?
I came to know the Messiah in 71, so I wasn't a believer. I was, my father was agnostic. He came over in the early part of the 20th century. He had me when he was 39 in 1950, came over in 24, and his family was ultra-Orthodox. Two of his older brothers were bachelors, and they kind of raised him. He was the youngest of 8. And so, you know, basically, he became somewhat of an agnostic, skeptic after a while, and he had a lot of issues, anger issues that he had never addressed in his life and so forth. So my home was rather tense, but, you know, we did live through a difficult time in the world of around us at the time. Of course, 63, which is 2 years before that, Kennedy was assassinated, and I can remember there was a pallor over the whole day and the whole weekend that was palpable. And they announced it in my 8th grade class. I know I'm younger than Rick here, but I was in 8th grade at the time, actually. And so basically, it was, you know, that was a very, very difficult thing. And then the world just changed after that significantly, but, you know, with several things occurring. The escalation of the Vietnam War, and the civil rights after the March on Washington. The civil rights movement became front and center in various cities, and with the work of Martin Luther King, the Reverend Martin Luther King. And then, of course, in February of 1964, I started listening to the radio. I got a radio for my bar mitzvah, and so I started listening to it in November of 63. And, you know, I thought the whole world was, you know, the Beach Boys, be true to your school, and, you know, and let's get down to the real nitty-gritty with, what's her name?
Shirley Ellis.
And so, but then, of course, you know, the world definitely changed February 9th, 1964, you know, with the first Ed Sullivan performances beginning with All My Lovin'. And so, yeah, it totally changed, you know, by 65. And of course, the drugs were eventually introduced and so forth. And so we were in a different situation.
Yeah. Rick, Vietnam War was a big part of your story.
Not actually, it is and it isn't. In '65, I graduated high school. I went to college in a town called Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, and knew immediately that I made a big mistake. It was Mayberry RFD, and I wanted out of there. So after 2 trimesters, I dropped out, expecting to go to Temple in September, but I wasn't savvy enough to figure out that I was going to get drafted in between. When that happened, I quickly joined the Air Force. That's a whole story in itself. So I was within the Air Force during that period of time that you mentioned, but I'm still very involved in the culture. I wasn't doing drugs at that particular time. I was never a big druggie, but I smoked pot and those type of things. But my life was a crazy life, because even though Vietnam was going on, I was stationed in Minot, North Dakota, and Goose Bay, Labrador, and we hardly ever talked about Vietnam. We just saw it on TV. We were concerned, but it just didn't personally touch us. And because we were in the military, we certainly weren't protesting the war, even though I have to admit that most of us did not approve of it, even though we were in the military. And I got out in '69, went back to Temple immediately. And as far as Michael covered so many things, but I think that the big thing that I remember was the Summer of Love. The music, to me, it was like the British invasion in '64. Then the Beatles were still certainly around in '67, but a lot of those other British groups sort of faded that summer, and it became the Doors and what was it, the Seeds, and all these crazy groups, and we thought they looked Meshuggah in '64. In '67, they looked completely out of their minds. And then they had things like Time Has Come Today by the Chambers Brothers, which was 18 minutes, and I think we're all deaf now because we wore what do they call it, the headphones to listen to it. And what was the other? Time Has Come Today and Inagata Davida. That was the other one. Those
Iron
Butterfly. We played them on the headphones, and we were, doing the wrong thing at the time. But we were young, and we never thought anything would happen. It was just the way it was. And Michael was right. The world changed in '64 with the Beatles. Then in '67 again, with just everything that happened. Then I think the other thing that was a big change was when Vietnam, which was, I don't think it was too unfavorable until the Tet Offensive. That's when all of a sudden everybody, my own father, who was such a hawk, became a dove. And he was a strong veteran, because people then realized that this was a war that we weren't going to win, and we were losing all these young guys, and it became a class thing where the poor were the ones dying, and the ones that weren't, and guys were running to Canada. It was just crazy what was happening then. And that's my memories of that era.
Yeah, interesting. Dinky, I know you were a goody two-shoes.
How do you know that? I didn't know you knew that. Well, because I had to work since I was 12.
Oh, wow.
I had a really, really bad childhood. And I came to think that my relying was solely on me. I couldn't rely on anybody else, because everybody was going to disappoint you, which eventually led me to the Lord. And maybe we'll talk about that later. But two things struck me. First was when you said the Wayback Machine. Nobody probably knows that, except was from Rocky and Bullwinkle.
That's right. Peabody and Sherman.
Peabody and Sherman.
Exactly
So that was funny. But also,
you could call this a fractured fairy tale.
Yes, that's
And Natasha and Boris.
I love them.
Well, that was actually a cartoon for adults, right?
Yeah.
But something Michael said also struck me was, I think for me, the Kennedy assassination was like a major thing. It was like you remembered where you were, just like their parallel is 9/11. You remember where you were. So I think I was in 8th grade or 9th grade. I don't remember the year. My years are not
I was
as
in
good
11th. I know that.
So
because 8th grade.
I was probably in the same as Michael, and I was on a bus coming home from school, and kind of that like broke my innocence in a way. It was
all
like,
of us,
what? Because you're 12. I don't know before, but and so just even as Michael was speaking, I was seeing like that parallel from 9/11, and just be interesting to see years-wise, like how that
kids feel.
It's interesting. It seemed to me that as I think of the post-World War II era, the 50s seemed to be Leave It to Beaver. I know that it was not all.
Or Father Knows Best.
Or Father Knows, which is one of my favorite
Yeah.
shows. Of course, what's my favorite show?
I Love Lucy.
Yours is I Love Lucy. Mine is Dobie Gillis.
Oh, right.
I'm a Dobie Gillis
Dobie
fan.
Gillis, right.
Dobie. I love Maynard.
I love
It's only
Maynard
you,
and
Maynard, it's
Zelda.
only you. Remember that one?
Great.
I love Zelda.
Yeah, Zelda.
With their
Zelda.
nose.
Yeah, right.
So,
Tuesday
but
night.
it seemed to be that the 50s we were riding on the high of having come out on top with World War II. And we're on this high, and we've got this Americana feeling that probably, for the first time, really, is we feel like America is the cool place to be, you know, as a nation. Elvis is, you know, top dog, and everything is Leave It to Beaver and Andy Griffith and Father Knows Best. And then we get up to 63, and I love what you said, that innocence was broken. 63 seemed to be, the assassination of Kennedy seemed to be the beginning of lost hope.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
There was a play, and I can't, it's a one-word title, I can't remember, but the whole premise of the play is that the world totally changed on November 22nd, 1963. And it follows the lives of these people from right before that until their adult, later years. But the interesting thing is, the 50s, I have nothing to base it on because I was a child. I was born in 47. So I didn't feel like America was especially great because I just assumed it was always like that. I never would have had anything to compare it to. But it certainly was good. But looking back, it wasn't good for everybody.
That's
Yeah.
right.
No,
Right. You're
absolutely.
exactly right. Can I say, because I remember I was at work one day and I said, the 50s were such a wonderful time. It was just great for everybody. And I had a black coworker, and she said,
exactly.
it
Not for
wasn't good
everybody.
for us. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily, I think there was still, I lived in Everett Park, which is interesting, where Beth Yeshua was for years. I actually was living there until I was 8 years old. I lived on 76th Street. And 2 doors from me was a Holocaust survivor who I was very friendly with that family. And I can remember in those early years of the 50s, the people, we were pretty much a solid Jewish neighborhood in Everett Park. And I think one of the reasons was because after the Holocaust, people were so afraid to be not in a community that was like that. And my mother, every friend that I had, are they Jewish, that type of thing. That's all.
I still do
That's
that.
all faded. That's faded, I think, in the world. I don't
Not for me.
but I don't think young kids generally get that from their parents now. But that was very common then.
Yeah.
And the other thing about America that was different was we did not expect fancy things. We were satisfied with things that were so basic and so plain, and everybody seemed content.
Yeah.
Nobody's content now that they're on their phones all the time or they're high-tech things. None of that existed.
That's interesting. So maybe what we're saying is that Father Knows Best was great on TV, but we're in the 60s we became. The question was, does Father Know
We
Best?
became all in the family, and
that's
that
true.
didn't come till the 70s.
Good arc.
But in the 50s, because I remember we lived in a row house. It was another Jewish area, West Oak Lane in Pennsylvania, and I remember sleeping outside on my patio in a lawn chair. Well, you can't do that. You can't let your kids sleep out. So there
You
definitely
can leave your doors unlocked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there definitely was a difference,
If we fast forward from 63 to the beginning of the Vietnam War, and then 1968 was a real red letter year with the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Someone said that was the year that hope died. How do you think?
Interesting. I never heard that.
How do you think that changed the psyche of America that year, 1968?
I just think the whole year was crazy. I mean, the Tet Offensive was in '68
One of the
also.
most difficult years there was. The riots.
Well, they started in '67. The Detroit riot was in the summer of '67.
And then
Was Kent State in 68?
That was in '70.
'70.
I think May 3rd or May 4th.
Oh, okay.
Now that to me was another thing. I remember exactly where I was when I heard that, and I knew instantly that the world would change after that. To shoot a kid, to kids on a college campus, that was just unbelievable.
Yeah. So do you think that there was a sense of lost hope in the late 60s and early 70s?
I do, yeah, I do.
I think so. I think there was feeling like, the old saying that from those days, you can't trust anyone over 30.
Oh, remember that? I forgot that.
Yeah. So it was a very difficult time. There was a tension. Like I might go, I had long curly hair and a beard, and I might go down the street, and you lock eyes with a more conservative older person, and there was like this animosity between the generations.
You're absolutely right. That's true.
Call it the generation gap, or you will, or whatever it is. There was this tension, like they were looking at us with our bell bottoms, pants, and all the rest of it as, as a disappointment, really.
Well, I graduated high school.
I agree with that.
I graduated high school in '68, and I wasn't really thinking about all that stuff.
Sure.
I have to tell you, I was having a great time. It was after that, like a couple years after that, like these guys, I just lost my train of thought. What I was going to say.
Well, 68
Oh, I know. So I had a job. I had to go to work after college. I didn't really. It was kind of a luxury for hippies that, like, a lot of them were rebelling against their parents' values.
Yeah.
And so if, the parents were wealthy, they wanted to be poor. I had to work for everything I had. So I was not interested. And actually, my husband always says that I was the real hippie because I wasn't going along.
You were the real counterculture.
Yes. So I don't know if that's true, but it wasn't until later that I started understanding what they're talking
Well,
about.
it's interesting. Michael probably doesn't even know this, but we were at Temple University at the same time.
Oh, really?
Because one day, Susan Rich, I looked in my yearbook, and there was Susan Rich in my yearbook. I'm was a little older. I had some college before I went in the service. Then I took courses while I was in the service and doubled up like I went in the summer. So I had to go a couple years when I got out. So I was on Temple campus in 70, and I guess in 72 I graduated. But the interesting thing was there was things going on the campus that were very foreign to me when I first got there. But then the next thing I knew, there was people trying to share the Lord. There was all kinds of protest groups. It was right at the Vietnam War was totally there. But my statement, I called myself a Lord and Taylor hippie.
Okay.
I put all the right clothes to be a hippie.
Not
but
surprised.
I didn't live the life. And I remember going, my mother was horrified. I bought a patch and put it right here and sewed it said, "Kiss my patch." And that's what I wore to school at least once a week. That was my statement about the whole. I just couldn't understand anything that was going on. I was working part-time, I guess, in school just for some extra money. But my life was like I wasn't involved in anything like what do they call it? Activism. I just sort of, whatever they want to do, I'm fine with them. They can do it. I'm not interested. I just want to go to nightclubs and dance, drink, and live like that. Absolutely no interest in anything political. I remember that, what's his name? Nixon was president then. And there was all these people hated Nixon, and there was all this stuff. I don't care, he'll be done in 72, just nothing fazed me then.
Yeah.
I just wasn't interested in anything.
Michael, were you more into the counterculture than Rick, or?
I was on one level, but I didn't get into the drugs. And so the music
that was cool.
Was something I was into. And I would listen to our station in Philadelphia, WIBG, which I understand originally was sort of a gospel thing. I believe in God is what they got it from.
Yeah, that's true.
IBG. So so I would listen to the and everybody had their 8 o'clock or whatever slot. Cousin Brucey in New York with WABC, and for us in Philadelphia it was High Lit, and he was, High Lit was kind of I think that he had deep inner issues. We went into a deep depression later, and I think that he struggled. And I think that's, you know, like the movie That Thing You Do, the Tom Hanks film. You look at these different DJs, and I think there should be a movie about a DJ in crisis from the 60s, because I don't want to get off on that tangent too much, but you know, there's something to that. They were like shadows. They struggled to know who they were, and they weren't teenagers, but they had to speak to the teenager and sort of be one of them. You know, high school Rowdy McBowdy.
Alan Freed, they did make a movie about Alan Freed.
Okay, they did. Okay.
Yeah, but he was older than than them.
So I just think
Jerry Blavat, of course.
Jerry Blavat in Philadelphia. Yeah, he was a fascinating person, and
I was just with him right before he died, Jerry.
Wow.
And he didn't look good, but we didn't think he was. Jerry, we went to an 80th birthday party for this woman, Arlene Sullivan. I used to dance on Bandstand, and she was. I was invited to her party, and Jerry was the DJ. And we all said, Jerry doesn't look that good tonight, but he was still dancing all over the place and whatever. And 2 months later, he died.
Rick brought people from when he was on Bandstand out to Beth Yeshua.
Oh, really?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, and I also took him to my junior high school. We had dances up until the pandemic. We were having dances once a year, reunions, and Arlene came, and I get together with those kids. Well, kids are almost 80, but I get together with them for lunch every so often. And even though everybody's lives have moved on in all kinds of directions, it's something that bonded us together as teens, and there are nothing but fond memories.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting when you talk about the culture. We used to go there by L. I wouldn't get on the L now if you paid me, you know. But we took the L to 46th and Market. You know, night bandstand ended at 5:30 back then, and it was already dark. When you know, we'd get on the L in the dark. We'd go. You didn't think about anything. It was. We were not afraid. That's what changed.
When do you think that changed?
Well, it hadn't happened yet when I was in Temple. I was riding the subway in Temple. So it wasn't in the 70s. I don't know.
Because I went to Temple also when I rode this.
I was there between 72 and 76. I took a couple of years between high school and college, and I think I felt relatively safe. The Broad Street subway, and for those of you who are not from Philadelphia, seemed a little more dangerous to me than the Frankfurt elevated.
I agree. Especially at night. I would go to Phillies games on the subway.
Yeah, right.
You know, that was into the 80s. I worked in the inner city.
Yeah.
I taught for 13 years in the inner city. Yeah. And once a year we took our kids to the Phillies game. It was a night for just safety patrol members. And we would meet at 6 o'clock at Broad and Allegheny, which I wouldn't go near now. Yeah. And we'd get on the subway. We'd go down to South Philly. I'd get back 11:30 at night, 12 o'clock. Didn't care.
Yeah, and things got more and more dangerous at Temple University, which was not like University of Pennsylvania or something, which was in like a university neighborhood, but you know, it was totally surrounded, Temple University, you know, by the ghetto, and you didn't want to step foot out of the
exactly right.
You know, and I can remember somebody from the Conservatory of Music was killed there, and the ripple, you know.
I remember that too.
I think that was actually the starting of the really bad time when that person was killed.
David somebody, he was a Jewish kid.
I never remember.
Yeah, you remember the same thing.
So I want to step back a little bit and talk music for a minute. Let's talk about the British invasion. What did that do to America?
It killed all the girl groups that I loved.
Okay. No more Supremes.
I did. They hadn't even come out.
Oh, yeah,
that thing you do, the girl group.
No, seriously, I loved the British invasion, but I didn't like that so many careers died because of the British thing. I would have liked to have seen everybody continue.
Bobby Vinton.
It killed Cameo Parkway Records. You know, the Phil Spector sound, all that disappeared.
Right, the Orlons.
Yeah, all of them were gone. But it was wonderful for a period of time.
When I was 12 years old, it was the first time they were coming to Philadelphia at the Beatles. And my friends were all going, so I don't want to see them. I was kicking myself like 4 years later.
You know, on the other hand, it gave an opportunity. what was going on in Liverpool and Manchester, places like that, that's where Hermits were from, Peter Noon, had been sort of percolating. The American records would come over there, the 45 RPM records, and they would just go crazy over them. And so for probably 6 or 7 years before the Beatles hit it big, or maybe 8 years, the British were emulating the American, scene. And who's that believer now? I can't remember. Cliff Richards.
Cliff, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were just, he was like supposedly the British Elvis, Cliff Richards.
Okay.
And Helen Shapiro, who we love.
Yep.
And she had a song called Walking Back to Happiness. Very corny.
But
it's great. Yeah. And so these people were huge. Helen was huge everywhere in the world except the United States. And she is a Messianic Jew, and many of you may know her.
But was she when she was popular?
I think maybe it was after that. After her arc of popularity, she still had some songs, but basically, but she was the headliner, and the Beatles were under her.
That's crazy.
They opened for her in '63.
They opened for her in '63. Is that crazy? Is that crazy or what?
Well, it's interesting. I had dinner with Helen. I guess it would have been about 1993 or 4. She came back for 1 year just to come to the conference, but she didn't perform. And we went out to dinner with some people. And I don't always have a great filter, and I ask things maybe I shouldn't ask. And I said, Helen, I don't get it. I said, you were so popular in England, and all these females from England came, were like Lulu and Marianne Faithfull and Dusty Springfield. They all had major hits in America.
What's her name? Downtown.
Yeah, Petula Clark. And you, who were so big, never had a major hit in America. Can you tell me why? I'm just curious. And she said, I had bad promotion.
Interesting.
And bad writers. I feel that her writers, Petula Clark had Tony Hatch.
Right.
That made it for her. Downtown is like an unbelievable song. Unbelievable.
She had so many great songs.
But but I don't think Helen ever had really great writers. And that's and sometimes people would pull from the United States, Burt Bacharach and Hal David and people like that to help them with their songs. And so I don't think she had that. For some reason, I mean, it's a good song. It's Walking Back to Happiness.
And You Ought to Know. What's it called? You Ought to Know. There's another one. That's,
right.
I have her greatest hit CD. I found it on Amazon.
So
and
now
I
she
bought
likes you again.
I was with Vera in Jericho 2 weeks ago, and she still sees Helen all the time.
Wow.
And I just got Helen's brand new CD. But it's all believer songs.
And now she does jazz.
Yeah.
Well, something Michael said was, I think, like relevant. I don't know how, but the Beatles were very influenced by they loved American music.
They loved Charlie Gracie, who I just went to his memorial 2 weeks ago.
So
I was there.
This might be totally out of context, but this scripture struck me as you were saying that, and I don't know why. Sometimes this happens to me, and then I can't follow through. But anyway, it's to everything there's a season and a time to
turn.
Yeah. And probably from the song, but But it just. Even though the world is chaotic because of Hasatan, everything God does is in order.
But Dinky, the thing with the British invasion, though, if you really study that whole era, they came literally after Kennedy, within 2 months after Kennedy. The world, the music, as much as we loved certain things, the music was in a very quiet period. It was not an exciting period of music for most people. And it was desperately needed something new, because we had the teenage idols were already dying off, and there was nothing. They needed that, and the world needed something after the Kennedy. It's like it was almost.
So we got our hope, I guess.
Oh, it was exciting.
Our expression from abroad at that time.
It was so exciting.
And they brought with them these, Peter and Gordon,
Dave Clark 5.
Dave Clark 5.
I love them.
I wonder what that did to our global consciousness. Did it open us up to a wider?
Well, unfortunately, there were some things they opened us up to that would be better not being opened up to. I mean, I think that it eventually devolved, if you will, into the drug culture.
And a lot of free love.
Yeah.
Things
And
like
no
that.
Hare Krishna and all that stuff. You know, from
So
Beatles
that's
being into
unfortunate.
that.
And the Beatles were getting into hallucinogenics.
Yeah, sure.
But what people didn't realize, and it's interesting that what Dinky brought that up, I've been blessed. I got through the years to know a lot of celebrities. And Charlie Gracie I knew pretty well. He lived only a couple miles from me, and I used to go to all the time friendly with his son. And they had a big thing 2 weeks ago at the Media Theater, just a special memorial in his honor. He just died. They had all these videos of Paul McCartney talking about Charlie. Charlie Gracie was a major influence in their lives.
Yeah.
And people forget that these British stars, a lot of people were, and Cliff Richard, for example, the other thing about him, he's the only person that had a gold record in every decade from the 50s to the 90s.
Wow.
One gold record.
Wow.
I don't think he does anything now.
Wow.
But yeah, most people don't know who he is.
That's interesting. So we fast forward a little bit to Bob Dylan. Janis Joplin.
That's one that I could
he's
talk about.
82.
I know, you
lot,
could
Bob
talk about
Dylan.
that forever, and I love
I'm not
Bob
going to
Dylan.
talk about it.
I couldn't say too well. I'm not a fan
Well,
of
I'm not a fan.
Jeff does a great Bob Dylan imitation.
Oh, does it?
Like 2 years ago, he turned 80, and I kept walking
He's 82
around.
now.
Yeah, he's 82. I kept walking around saying to Jeff all the time, Bob Dylan's 80 years old. It like totally freaked me
No,
out.
it's just-
Ringo turned 83
I
today.
I know, but it was
Today?
Bob
Oh,
Dylan
wow.
for some reason.
I think the music and the way he sang it, because there was a certain emotion he put into it, but also, in spite of the fact that some people didn't like it, obviously his voice changed over the years and became less appealing. But also the message and the lyrics in his songs. I mean, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016.
Was
It's
it?
not.
It was a
Yeah,
poem.
that's not a
I
coincidence.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's not a coincidence.
Would you say that?
And they were quoting "Hard Rain's Gonna Fall," and she forgot the lyrics. The one person, it was so embarrassing. But Dylan didn't even show up.
Yeah.
I just felt like he really spoke to me from the protest years. I accepted all of them up through John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline. You know, I that whole arc that he did there, and then the three faith-based albums, which were unbelievable, and he is still a strong believer to this day. I just think that. But that was like a whole new thing for me. The way that those songs, starting with starting a Slow Train, you know, and you know, Got to Serve Somebody, up through. But you know, a song like you know, the songs in Highway 61 Revisited, you know, Desolation Row. They're extraordinary songs, you know.
Would you say that Bob Dylan, for instance, Bob Dylan specifically, I guess, was if we take a loose term, a prophet of sorts for his generation, speaking out the truth of his generation? And
he always hated people saying that.
Well, the times when they were changing, that sort of was prophetic.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I mean, why do you think I didn't like him?
because
they're
you
like jitterbug.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm so shallow that you couldn't dance to his music, so I didn't want to hear it.
Right.
I wanted dance music then.
Yeah.
Just wasn't into him.
I lived in West Virginia in 1975, I think. We went to Tennessee, and he was doing a concert there, and it was the people from Tennessee, and they were saying, "Go home, Bob."
Yeah.
They didn't like him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But probably not for the same reason I did.
No.
So let's talk about that Woodstock era then. What, you know, art always expresses culture. So what was the expression in that era of the late 60s of Woodstock?
You couldn't have paid me to go.
Okay.
I would have never. And I'm a
didn't go
people
either.
person.
Yeah.
But not that many people.
Yeah.
And when I have to own the video to Woodstock because I did enjoy a lot of the music. I look at all those people living like that. I go, no way.
Yeah.
It just was. But I think many people that was a high watermark of their life.
Yeah.
The ones that went.
One of my best friends.
They loved it.
All through elementary school and through high school and everything, bought a sold drugs there and bought a VW microbus with the money and ended up dying in that microbus on Wissahickon Parkway. Yeah.
Wow.
And he at that time was already taking nitric oxide canisters that his father would get as an anesthesiologist. So basically, it was a terrible, terrible waste of life.
Yeah.
In that generation. Yeah. Terrible waste of life. They didn't need to get into the drugs or any of those other things. But the great artists stand for themselves. Some of the great artists. And they say that Jimi Hendrix is probably the greatest guitarist.
He was good.
In history.
Richie Havens, I loved.
Oh, Richie Havens.
You couldn't dance to him, but I loved him.
And I love the thumb that he used.
He would lisp.
Freedom, I love that song.
And what songs did he do?
Here Comes the Sun, Freedom.
Yeah. Did he do All Along the Watchtower?
No, that's Jimi Hendrix.
That's Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. But I love the way he used his thumb on the guitar.
When they were all screaming about Jimi Hendrix, I was always a Richie Havens. I really liked him a lot. I liked some of Jimi Hendrix.
Richie Havens was calm.
Purple Haze.
Cool.
Yeah. I also like Grace Slick and the Jefferson Airplane. I love them. I'm trying to think, who else was at Woodstock? I can't remember now.
Oh, Janis Joplin.
Yeah, of course.
That was a big
John Sebastian.
But he was a Lovin' Spoonful to me.
Yes.
I never thought of him as a single.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But I loved the Lovin' Spoonful.
I loved the Lovin' Spoonful.
I did too.
They were my favorite
Summer
group.
in the City. Rain on the Roof. They had so many good songs. Do You Believe in Magic?
When Paul McCartney was asked about a great American group, he skipped over the Beach Boys and he said the Lovin' Spoonful.
Well, Mark has not mentioned the best of all the music. I can't believe you haven't brought it up yet.
Go ahead.
Motown.
Listen,
Motown.
I live in Motown.
Motown was out. Motown came out before the British invasion. I can name you 10 songs that were hits. But it exploded when the Supremes made their first gold record. And they were called the No-Hit Supremes for 3 years.
Really?
Never
did.
Nope.
I went to see them.
During the Standards era, writers that didn't sing, you had Rodgers and Hart, you had Rodgers and Hammerstein, you had Lerner and Lowe, and many others, Cole Porter, but Holland Dozier and Holland.
And Smokey Robinson.
And Marvin Gaye.
But don't skip over Holland Dozier and Holland.
They wrote all the Supremes practically.
Let me just say, and not only them, but other groups of Temptations. And if you look, who also used Smokey Robinson, Four Tops, a lot of Holland Dozier and Holland.
Brenda Holloway, Tammy Terrell. They had all. I went to a couple shows with Motown, but I saw Diana Ross and the Supremes with Flo right before she left at Steel Pier.
Oh,
and this was, you paid a fee to get in Steel Pier. When I showed up to the, I forget the name of the auditorium, they said, "Would you like a reserved seat?" I said, "How much does it cost?" 25 cents. And I got to sit in the third row.
It's so funny.
And their new song then that summer was Reflections, which was very different for them because it was sort of psychedelic.
Well, I don't know if you would Reflections. It's Romeo and Juliet is not exactly psychedelic, but more Renaissance.
Yeah.
But actually, also I saw two groups at there. I saw Herman's Hermits.
I saw them. We were at the same show.
Yeah, with Peter New, and I saw
Summer '65.
The Animals. I saw Eric Burdon and the Animals, House of the Rising Sun. I saw them there.
Well, I saw Peter Noon. It's interesting. I went to that show in '65 also, and I found two interesting things happened there. Number one, I'd never seen people faint. There was girls fainting. We were in the Marine Ballroom. But I also, Herman Hermits was due to go on at 2 o'clock, and they weren't there yet, and the crowd was getting very restless. And Ed Hurst came up on the stage. That's Hilda's brother.
Okay.
And came up on the stage and said, "They'll be here soon." And the crowd was getting very rambunctious, and they put on the #1 song of the country then was Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. They put on the record, and the entire crowd started to sing and got calmed down. And it showed the power of music.
Speaking of British bands that borrowed heavily from American styles. The Rolling Stones loved the blues.
The Bad Boys.
Yeah.
They really did get into the blues.
I want to get into a little bit of a deeper discussion. There was a maybe a sense of directionlessness in the late 60s and early 70s.
That's true.
How do you think that fed into spiritual seeking that led to many of you coming to faith? I know you came later. Right?
I didn't come to faith until 1990.
I can speak for that time. I think it fed right into it. That's what the Jesus Revolution is about, the movie, which I know that not everybody watching this is going to be at this conference, but we're going to show it here on Saturday.
See it.
Yep. Yes. That's
I loved it.
And I think that fed into. It was the next thing, after everybody was into Hinduism and the drugs and everything, that all of a sudden people began to re-examine, I can remember, who was that guy? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but that there was a sort of a humorist and everything. I can't remember his name now. He had a great voice.
Saul, somebody?
Yeah, Mort Saul.
Mort Saul.
No, it wasn't Mort Saul. It was, I can't remember his name. And he had a commercial on television. They paid for this ad. And it was a guy dressed up as a hippie, and there was somebody announcing, saying, and he said, I don't know, but eventually they started quoting John 3:16, and he said, "Man, that's deep," or something like that, and it was put on by one of the Christian organizations.
I remember that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. You guys know who it is. He was a radio guy.
Okay.
Big radio humorist and comedy
Not Paul
guy.
Harvey.
No, a comedian, humorist.
Well, obviously there has to have been a lack of something because, first the drugs came in to fill it, and Jeff had a professor, I'll never forget this, and he said to Jeff was an English major, and he said to the class, peace and love is drugs and sex. And that's exactly what I think Satan was trying to do, but God, was stirring up this desire for something to fill the void, and it was peace and love, but how Satan
That's
likes
true, and
to...
Ringo said, that's Ringo's top phrase he says now, peace and love.
Yeah.
He always says that.
So I really think that the kids were searching for that. They rightly, sometimes wrongly, sometimes saw in their parents hypocrisy, emptiness, and
But that's always been that way, I think.
But for
forever,
some reason,
forever.
I don't know why that was the time. I don't know earlier times, but I know for like our generation, for some reason, I think God does that all the time. There's times that happens, but at that particular time, that was,
Not every generation had Haight-Ashbury.
Yeah.
But I never thought about it at the time, but when I became a believer, and when that era would come to my mind, I often thought that we were a very divided country like we are now, but it wasn't as bad as now, but it was pretty bad then. That God just stepped in and fixed it.
Yeah.
Something had to be done. The country was not going to go downhill yet, and he came in and made it better.
I wonder if, ironically, the hippie movement was an Acts 2 precursor to the Jesus people Acts 2 community.
Because the 60's movement?
The hippie movement.
The hippie movement.
Because the hippie movement was that peace and love, looking for, looking for love in all the wrong places, as the song says. And when those hippies became believers, it was like a reconvening of the Acts 2 community. Shared everything, loved everyone, very organic faith communities,
Well, it started out like that. It didn't.
I have a
good friend that went to Haight-Ashbury in '67, and she has some pretty wild stories. It wasn't all love,
Okay.
even
No,
then.
of
What
course
you don't
not.
mean the believers though?
No, I'm talking about the
that's
and
what
then
you're
you have-
talking about.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I
Did
think about the
it-
hippie movement in general.
Yeah,
Well, did
Altamont.
it pave the way
Altamont
then
got
for?
killed somebody.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it pave the way for that Jesus people, the Lonnie Frisbee
Right.
community that we
Yeah.
saw in the
Right.
movie?
Right.
You know, what do you think about that?
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know. I
Yeah.
never thought
Where sin
about it.
abounds, grace does much more abound.
Mm.
And I think, the enemy, comes in like a flood. The Lord lifts up a standard against him. And I believe it was a generation hungry for something and ready for something new and something real, something that they'd seen everything else. They wanted reality. And that's why I'm so glad this film has been produced, because that was an untold story, how that generation was impacted by a move of God's Spirit. And there's one recently that's happened in Asbury Seminary, right? And in Wilmore, Kentucky. And there was one there in 1970, just before, the Messianic movement really kicked in. And it's just very interesting to see the timing and the comparisons. And we haven't yet seen, I think believers have been touched in this one. As far as what we saw in the last one that we're talking about, that had happened at Asbury, and also it happened in the whole world with the Jesus movement, which really started in 69, 70. Jews for Jesus was founded in 69, but 70, 71, the Messianic congregations beginning in 71. This, there's just some parallels going on here, and there's, with them, but we haven't seen it like it was then, where it reached the world. There was a strong evangelistic aspect to the what came out of things like the Asbury Awakening, and now we look at it. It's mostly believers coming back to a first love with God and a repentance theme for believers. I don't think we've seen yet, but I'm really glad that this film just came out along with Asbury, because it's making a statement of what could be, Tens of thousands of people, hundreds got saved, came to know the Lord.
And 40% of those were Jewish, is the report that I've heard.
Yeah, I never heard of statistics before. That's interesting.
Well, the scripture you quoted was what I was thinking about for the past couple days, relating to what we're talking about, where sin abounds, grace does more. And so I looked it up this morning, and it's even grace much more abounds. It's super amazing grace. And I think that's what was happening then, because the sin was abounding, but then God came along and just poured his mercy and grace out on that.
That was my point too. I don't know if I'm praying that he's going to do the same thing now. Because the country's so divided, but so, we don't know.
So that takes me to my next question. What are the similarities between that tumultuous time in the 60s and 70s and now? The hippie movement.
The similarities?
What are the similarities between
division,
culture
of course, but
division?
I was going to say the one thing that's majorly different in the 60s, it was the young against the old a lot. Now it's political ideology,
right against left
versus age, and that's a major difference.
That is a big difference.
But on the other hand, and I don't know if, like what we saw last night, we had the youth night, and what impressed me about last night and what you're saying then. And I don't know if this is just, Christianity in general, or if it's with the Messianic Jews, but the kids last night, that's what it seemed to me, like the kids were coming in. The kids, it's hitting the kids because the world is so horrible.
So that's a similarity, but here's the difference.
Okay.
Those kids that were here last night, they were all the children of believers.
Right.
Yeah,
what we're seeing, and even what we're seeing in Asbury, where I was, are the students at Asbury who were sent there by parents who knew the Lord. It's happening among the children of believers.
Right.
What happened in 71,
No, you're right.
the parents weren't even in the picture.
Right.
Exactly. They were the parents hated
And we
them.
can see that in Chuck Smith and what he did there
Yeah.
and how he got pushback
Yeah.
Yeah.
for allowing them into his church.
Yeah.
Except that if there's kids that are children of believers, they're coming in contact with other children. So they could be used as
But it
an
hasn't, the
influence.
fruit hasn't.
Not yet, but
Yeah.
I just what
They
I
need
see,
to be
I think that's what's
encouraged
going to happen.
that if we're going to see a great awakening, because when we would
Yeah.
go to Joe and Debbie Finkelstein's house
Yeah.
back in 71,
Yeah.
I would be sitting there and people that we've been praying for in a little circle in his living room, 3 nights later we would see them. They were like the Lord was drawing them. And there were, it started out with just a few people, and then he had a Thursday night thing, and they would have 100, 150 people
Wow.
packed into the living room from just coming to know the Lord from the community. Even before the Messianic congregations really took off in Philadelphia, they would go to a church or what have you on Sunday morning, and then they go back to the Finkelsteins. And so that was the difference. Is you never knew when the person to your left and right in life was going to come to know the Lord, because the outpouring was so strong for people to accept the Messiah and for new people to come in, and then it started including the Jewish people for the first time in really many centuries, and that to that extent. And when the Jesus Revolution was on the cover of Time magazine, this was a revolution of the non-believer coming to know the Lord.
I still think that's coming.
It is coming, but it's not there yet.
I think so too.
I believe it's coming.
I think we're on the precipice of that.
Yeah.
And so if we're on the precipice of that, what do we say to these young believers who are a cell phone generation, which means they're here, they're not here? The 60s and 70s were here. They were focused on community.
The be-ins.
Yeah.
I mean, in the
Oh my
60s,
God.
in the 60s anyway, no kid was without their transistor radio.
Okay,
But
sure.
they weren't
So
addicted to
Right.
the transistor
Right,
radio.
right,
That's
right.
the difference.
Yeah. So,
Very good point.
So what do
Very
we
good
say
point,
to
Rick.
this selfie generation about what needs to happen with them to prepare for this revival that we're on the precipice of?
Well, it's never going to be what it was. So
Right.
we have to move from where they're at.
Correct.
We have to go, you can't like say that they did this and no. And tell you the truth, I'm 72 years old. I don't know. They know.
Right.
I don't know. Now maybe these guys
Oh, I know.
can speak to that, but I don't know because my mind is not their mind. But I know God's bigger than everything, and He's going to do it. But I don't know. Maybe you guys can speak
I have
to
no
that.
clue. I agree though that God will do it.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
all it
There's
is.
an outpouring of the Spirit and there's in answer to prayer. Many people were interceding and praying and fasting and praying before that. What we saw in the early 70s, there were many people praying, and I think that that concept is happening, but it probably needs to increase. And I think a lot of churches and even Messianic synagogues, and I'm not saying that we're immune from it at Beth Messiah in Cincinnati, are like fortresses for those who are in there in the four walls and try to work with them. It used to be, and maybe this will never be again. Maybe the season is over. But Joe Finkelstein would have us go out and hand out tracts, in Rittenhouse Square and in
They were still doing that when I came to Bethany. Jeff Foreman and I
We were
did
doing
it.
that. In
We did it on the beach, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Colson
Donna
Club.
would get that.
Marty would say,
Yeah.
do you know what these people are doing? Like, who are these people? And
Right,
then,
Can I tell you a funny story about that? When I was brand new at Beth Yeshua, and I was so worldly, I was already 40 years old. The woman who originally brought me, as we were riding to Beth Yeshua one night, and I had just accepted the Lord, I said, Jill, do they have casino trips to Beth Yeshua? So she says, what do you mean? And I said, all the synagogues in the Northeast have these casino trips. Do they have them there? And she said, no, they don't have that. And I said, why not? We'll talk later. So that night, that very night, Jeff Foreman, we didn't have overheads yet. We had announcements. He goes, CBY at the Shore Day coming. So I said, Jill, I told you they had that. And she goes, no, it's not that. So I said, well, what is it? She goes, go up and Jeff will tell you after services. So I go up to Jeff and I said, Jeff, what is CBY Day at the Shore? And he goes, oh, it's really great, Rick. I hope you'll come. We go on the beach and we dance and we this and people. And I said, no, really, what is it? Like that. And he said, that is what it is. And I said, what? And he goes, what did you think it was? A day at the casinos? And I said, yes. And Jeff lost it. But I said, all Jewish organizations have casino trips. I just didn't know. I mean, I was so new in the Lord.
So great.
And I went and I had a ball. We danced on the beach. We went to Tony's for dinner on Pacific Avenue afterwards. We had such a good time. But that's how innocent I was, about all that.
That's so funny.
But it's just funny how the times have changed. Young people today, in my opinion, because I don't have grandkids or anything, I don't think that they even think in a spiritual sense unless they are led by somebody. They're not just going to find it on their own. Yeah,
that's what Michael was saying. Yeah. But the hope is that the kids of these believers are going to influence. We just had a bat mitzvah in our synagogue. I think it was
Livia.
Yeah, it was before Livia.
Tirza.
No, it was. I don't want to say that was name.
Okay.
But the child was in a Christian school, didn't like it, and left, and went into a public school, and she is trying to start a Bible study.
She gave her testimony Monday night.
Yes. So what else was there? But in any event, that I think is how the other children will be reached.
Right.
And I'm very excited because I hope I'm around to see this, because I think it's going to be something that we can't even imagine. It's going to be incredible.
There's something in all the interviews that I've done, the word that keeps, it hasn't really been spelled out, but the word that keeps popping up in my spirit is authenticity. There was an authenticity in the Jesus movement. And I think that in order to be prepared for the next move of God, we have to be authentic believers. I know that my child has struggled with identity and struggled with a lot of the things that this generation is dealing with. And the key to her growth in the Lord, I think, has been my open and authentic communication with her. And I think that speak to this as the final question, I guess, but as the older generation, we, and I include myself because I'm almost 50 here, we need to be authentic, and we need to allow them to be authentic, even if it's not the expressions that we expected them to have. Just like the people that didn't expect the hippies to be expressing what they were, we need to allow for their expressions. What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree 100%. But I think, something we didn't discuss just real quickly.
Yeah.
I think the hippies, when they first came out, people thought they were going to be like the beatniks.
Right.
I think that's what they initially expected, and they didn't know. The beatniks were, I don't even know what they were about, to be honest, looking back. But the hippies were about something.
Yeah.
They represented a lot of things, whether we agreed with them or not. And that's what's today. I don't know what's happening in that with that type of expression. Is there a group like the hippies right now that exist? Any kind of large group?
No, I don't think so. I think that there is. I think that there is, though, this desire for self-expression.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And parents are much more accepting of children's desires now than they were when we were growing up. Parents said it.
Well, that's good and bad.
I think it is a mix too. But I do think, we lived them. The grandparents said something, you just did it. You didn't question. Not until we got older.
Well, I think what you said about how you're, proceeding, and the main thing is love.
Yeah.
And that's what you're showing your
All you need.
child.
I'm
And
just kidding.
Yeah.
all you need
Right,
is love.
67,
Exactly.
Summer of Love.
So, that love covers the multitude of sins.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what
True,
True
real
love.
love.
Real love.
Yes,
That-
right.
That's another song.
Yeah.
by him.
Yeah, not- yeah,
I mean
right.
that. Real love. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
That was what's her name, Jody Watley.
But I
Real
mean,
Love.
I think that's
Oh, that,
the only answer.
Lennon wrote a song called
Yeah.
Real Love.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you all being here.
That was
And
fun.
I could go on and on. You know, we could keep going, but
Is this
I'm
gonna
gonna
be
respect
seen
every
anywhere?
time. It is.
I wasn't sure we
I
like.
didn't either. I would've
I wasn't
trusted
sure
you.
we
No,
were
you look
doing
great.
doing this for your book or whatever, and then you needed to watch it for information.
So you'll let us know when it's.
I'll let you know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to go on like
No big deal.
YouTube or
Yeah. It'll be.
I would have worn a nicer shirt.
No, you look fine. You look great. It's going to be on YouTube, and then once I have all of the testimonies compiled, then it goes into the book as one story
Right,
of that
exactly.
era. you know,
Okay.
So. But
Well, I
anyway.
just thank the Lord that you're doing this.
Yeah, well,
thank
I mean,
you.
I agree.
yeah,
Appreciate it.
it's
Thank you
really
for
great.
including me.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here. So, all right. So this has been another episode of They Called Him Yeshua with our guests, Rabbi Michael Wolf, Rick Fisher, and Dinky Lowenthal. And God bless.